Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to Nesby Reacts, where today we got ourselves the entirety of an album from an act named Klive Kraven, titled Death Comes in the Day. And if we switch over to here, we got ourselves the album art on YouTube here. We got all 10 tracks here. I should note that this is the third album, as I understand it, as part of a trilogy, with the first album in 2011 titled Death Comes in the Dusk, and then the second album was from 2017 titled Death Comes in the Dawn. So it's going to be good to hear the end of this triad. We're going to listen through each of these 10 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Welcome to Jonestown, let's go.
The world, the kingdom suffers violence, and the violence shall take it by force. If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace. Living, you're looking at death. It's only living is much more difficult. Raising up every morning and not knowing what's going to be the night's bringing. It's much more difficult.
Welcome to Jonestown, my name is Jimmy. I got many enemies that are trying to get me. Trying to define history with a great new pupil the Lord has given me. Pledge the loyalty under the tree of hickory. The master of masking misery, and listen to me. You could live in a paradise, we'll spare your life. We only need help to prepare for the night. A ritual to plunge from plight. This is Guyana, there's not a none in sight. Stay out the water cause the piranhas bite. With the Brahmas might anaconda tight. But we provide a life you couldn't dream about. This is Shangri-La and the outsiders, we keep them out. Ignore the cries of their grieving spouse. We get rid of the weak and weed them out. You see me at work, I'm a mastermind. Following teachings of the Father Divine.
You see it's simple, they say you see something in you. So welcome to Jonestown, you're part of the family now. Drink the Kool-Aid and make the vow in the people's temple. You see it's simple, they say you see something in you. So welcome to Jonestown, you're part of the family now. Drink the Kool-Aid and make the vow.
I established a stronghold in Cali, temples in LA to the valley, where we lay in the mission. Started the planning commission, lieutenants under my direction, the most loyal my selection. Had the faith healing revival, tongue lashing my rivals, attacking anyone bashing the Bible. Pushed out the states cause people were lied to, so went to Guyana and built a commune. There was 600 of us and not a lot of room, 400 more joining soon. Revolutionary suicide or avoiding doom, I'll leave it on you to choose. I prefer you don't speak unless spoken to, or you'll get an open wound. Go against me, it's your life consumed. I live in the shadows where my vices ensue. Got me changing like a lichen in the moon.
Are you some wordplay with the follow there?
So welcome to Jonestown, you're part of the family now. Drink the Kool-Aid and make the vow in the people's temple. You see it's simple.
Interesting texture difference between the vocal takes.
So welcome to Jonestown, you're part of the family now. Drink the Kool-Aid and make the vow.
Please, for God's sake, let's get on with it. We've lived as no other people have lived and loved. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it. To have to watch you every day die slowly, and from the time you're a child to the time you get gray, you're dying. I want to see you go, though. They can take me and do with me whatever they want to do. I want to see you go. I don't want to see you go through this hell no more. No more, no more, no more. No more.
So most of the color of this honestly came from those vocal takes, didn't it?
In the people's temple, you see it's simple. They say you see something in you. So welcome to Jonestown, you're part of the family now. Drink the Kool-Aid and make the vow in the people's temple. You see it's simple. They say you see something.
So that was Jonestown, or Welcome to Jonestown, should I say, track 1 off of this album. Because in each of these sort of post-track little sections, I'm going to be providing an overall sort of like mini-song analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production. And then at the end of this video, there's going to be like an overall album analysis of the same things, plus any applicable constructive critique. And then finally, my general thoughts from a general listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this track is about? I think it's more a combination of trying to welcome you to Jonestown, as per, drinking the Kool-Aid references from the spooky sounding lady in those chorus parts. but it's also about Klive Kraven on the mic communicating their position within this place, being a part of the shadows, you know, like going through those changes in the moonlight, and effectively how they've kind of staked their claim here and maybe how they are going to proceed forward. Don't talk to them unless spoken to, etc., asserting dominance there. And I think that's an interesting precedent to start at the beginning, because either you can take it as Klive being welcomed and then them asserting what they want to do, or you've come to town hearing these other voices around you as you have this sort of further elaboration put forward by Klive. So either way, I think the story is quite compelling. It's an interesting start to proceedings there. It's incredibly spooky in part because of those vocal layers that are on the side, those kind of operatic layers there that sound like old school horror movie flicks. It's really neat to hear the flutter and kind of ghostliness of those, you know, Jonestown sounding like a kind of terrifying place there, and you've got those sort of spoken parts, the narration there discussing the position, you know, the guy sort of like talking about the suffering and pain they've gone to and watching people kind of go on and stuff like that. It's an interesting sort of surreal environment with all these different narratives which are put forward and different vocal tones and textures to kind of contrast and make them stand out and add further compositional diversity to the piece. I feel that the rapped vocals in those verse sections are quite clear and straightforward, and I like that you can get all the words clearly, and there's nice sort of little call and responses and overdubs and stuff as you go through it. Clean transfers into the chorus parts. And I also appreciate that the storytelling is still relatively minimalist. Like, it's a 3.5 minute track, but we did allow ourselves to stay there with those more melodic and harmonic overlapping vocal layers with those kind of sinister sounding melodies for a bit until you had the final hook line work at the end. You also had a similar kind of texture and timbre to that lady's kind of ba-da-da-da-dum as you did to the guy who was mentioned at the start and near the end of the track as well there. I just think that was intriguing to have that kind of connection there, almost to make it more seem like Klive is the current and all these other people are around them in the ether. The memories of what used to be happening there. Ultimately though, you know, we had great sort of flow and cadence on the mic there. The words came through clear, and I appreciate how the different takes are leveled and spread throughout the stereo field as well as the frequency spectrum. And we seemed like we were in control of the situation. In general, great use of the lead there. Ultimately, outside of that though, you know, with varying verses and choruses and hook lines and those sort of sampled kind of spoken parts there in different sections, as well as the outro fade out, you had a track there which didn't have any filler across its 3.5 minutes. It was right within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. Outside of the different sort of harmonies with most of the coloration coming with those vocals, you had a bass line underneath that kind of thumped around the low end and spread itself around the fretboard a little bit, but not overwhelming the listener. The drum beat with a mixture of quarters, eighths, and occasional syncopated 16th with a kind of swingish kind of groove to it, had a bit of swagger to it in a way that I think allowed you to have some interesting rhythmic options on the microphone, but it was never too dominant there. We had some keys as well for a bit of coloration, again, occasional bits of air candy in the mid-range there to sort of sweeten up the sides, but ultimately it was more about the groove there. And ultimately, yeah, it was just more sort of accenting the keys with their triads there in the upper range on the right side. Thematically, you know, minor oriented, because why would you have a track like this as a major leaning there? It's clearly not a happy situation. There's a lot of suffering and struggling that is mentioned here, so I think the chord progression that you have more sort of revolving around the root note does well, and any sort of like upper register is simply there with the vibrators and kind of warbles that you have from the performance itself. So I think the chord progression, the bass line doesn't overdo itself. Great variety with the leads again. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, things in general are pretty well leveled and recorded. The vocal takes it through clearly, and any sort of like effects or filtering, whether through compressor, EQ, or sort of like radio filterish kind of low cuts of the low end to kind of have the mid and high kind of scratchy kind of stuff is kind of neat. There's some interesting stylization of how those things are presented. Great, you know, inclusion of the samples, like the kind of, again, the werewolf sound, or like the person speaking, like at the end there on the start. And ultimately, yeah, it's just well sort of balanced there. Music surrounds you in the stereo field, no weird resonances in the frequency spectrum. Things aren't overproduced and it's nice and loud. Bit of pumping bus compression, like things handled. Also, just a shout out to the fade out that you have at the end. I think that's really cool, isn't it? Well, isn't it nice to have that little bit of kind of finesse there as a closer? It makes you feel confident about the rest of the album. Forest the Impaled though, track number 2.
The stench struck them first. 20,000 decomposing corpses do more than offend the eyes. They penetrate every sense, making even seasoned Ottoman fighters retch and stagger. As Sultan Mehmed II approached the Wallachian stronghold, he expected fortifications. Instead, he was confronted with something that would linger in his nightmares. A forest, not of trees, but of bodies raised on sharpened posts. Human beings impaled, left in various states of decay, some grotesquely twitching even after days of torment.
I was revered as a hero across Romania. Moved my operation to Transylvania. Went berserk on the Turks and Ottomans. Extinguished any existence acknowledgement. Diminished the hope and reveled in it. Looked me in the eye, said they saw the devil in it. The malevolence, the brutal temperaments. Skewed victims at my castle entrances. Tortures worse than death sentences. Vultures swarming above my residence. Several authors warmed on my relevance. Ethel organs forewarned my presence. My world was war-torn. All was the essence. A horrific reality taught me lessons. My father was a savage ruler.
It was an unusual kind of organ that came in there. It kind of just staggered in there and kind of sat there. There was a moment like that in the previous track as well there. It's a bit unusual there. It's very dramatic and tense.
Question, a total menace, seeking global vengeance. Then they killed him and my brother with the henchmen. That's when my brutality got invented.
Watch the eyes dilate.
Turntablism.
Heads impaled on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate. Watch the eyes dilate, no morals. Aim violate, you enter the cave where the bears hibernate. Bodies in the valley, heads impaled on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate.
I used my anger as incentive, was attentive in an act of revenge. Executed over 100,000 by the end. A tragedy, a travesty, my deeds were dastardly. I ended the lives of many tragically. And it got worse when I knew they were after me. I got work to do before they capture me. My reign of terror paints a lucid nightmare. The smell of putrid corpses, they weren't prepared. Traps that snared the horses, we sent reinforcements. The four survivors on the stakes, and if they refuse, we peel the face. We're begging for their God to reveal the faith. I entered the chambers with the concealed blade. The blood congealed when the steel flayed. You stood your fate when you entered the gate. You're face to face with the vampire, they love to praise. As a young man, it was paid to leave villages raised.
Watch the eyes dilate.
Again, similar approach to this as the previous track.
Bodies in the valley, heads impaled on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate. Watch the eyes dilate, no morals. Aim violate, you enter the cave where the bears hibernate. Bodies in the valley, heads impaled on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate.
Infants were forced onto the same spikes as their mothers, placed at the breast as if still suckling. Pregnant women were transfixed through the womb, and in the center of this obscene display, Vlad dined. A table was laid among the moaning, the begging, the shrieks. Servants brought roasted meat, warm bread, and wine. He ate calmly while tens of thousands died around him. One noble nearby gagged at the reek of blood and excrement. Vlad noticed. "Does the smell offend you?" he asked. When the man admitted it did, Vlad had him hoisted onto a stake, twice as high as the rest. From up there, he said lightly, "The odor won't reach you."
Watch the eyes dilate.
It's so messed up, dude.
Bodies in the valley.
It's just
Heads
horrific,
impaled
dude.
on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate. Watch the eyes dilate, no morals. Aim violate, you enter the cave where the bears hibernate. Bodies in the valley, heads impaled on stakes, corpse with a twisted face, murder spree, horrific fate.
And we're done. Again, a similar approach to the structure and layering of the vocals to the previous part. Having another fade out here. You've had another chapter to it. I don't know if I was expecting this album to be this dark, but when you literally have the Grim Reaper As the sun rises with death comes in the day, I suppose that's a given. So Forest of the Impaled, I believe, is referring to Vlad the Impaler. You've got the narrator discussing the scene there, the horrific stuff that occurred to the children and the woman and the pregnant, and just him eating in the room, and then the person saying they were offended and being stuck on a pike twice. It's just gruesome and brutal. And it's the second track in this album. And I think what I will say is, with the way that the verses are communicated, with the way that you've got a kind of more sort of modern, sort of like alternative, a kind of more contemporary alternative to the old school kind of storytelling there. It's just a nice way to sort of discuss like the different angles of the same thing. Somehow it's more personable. We also discuss alongside those kind of really kind of sinister sounding ethereal lady vocals there with the warble there, the radio filter. We have the turntable and the man as well coming back in with some filtered parts. Effectively discussing walking into the bear's cave, you know, where the bears hibernate, and it's kind of like you think about the guy who got impaled walking into the scene and having a terrible time and then dying because he just walked into the wrong room at the wrong time and made the wrong reaction. Yeah, so screwed up, dude. It's awful, man. It's just awful. You have a similar vocal performance on the rap section to the previous track, which helps to connect those, and there's a similar sort of like polish to the flow and cadence to the way they spit their lines to put them forward. And the way that's kind of non-emotional, which I kind of appreciate. I feel like if we've been too aggressive with it, it might have maybe been a bit too much. We had interesting use of Foley, like horse noises and chains and all that. Alongside that, which helped to world build, we went between those, as I mentioned, with those kind of vocals, the lady vocals that we had in the chorus, singing those kind of lines that are very sort of wispy and airy. And I think, again, having the chopping of the turntablism just kind of cemented the hip-hop rapper stylings, and having the guy come back in with a different vocal interpretation of sort of presence there just helped to sort of segment the track further. But there was like clean transitions between the narration, the rap, and the chorus parts there, which I appreciate. The production in general is quite well done. And ultimately, I just think it's almost spooky because of how non-emotional the description is of the whole entire situation there. It's kind of like you're walking into a movie with each scene. So vocals are well handled there. Structurally, this track at 5 minutes 02, I think with several sort of like paragraphs or sort of further expositions on what's going on there with the specificity of the subject matter, that you have the different verses and the choruses, etc. It makes a good use of that 5 minutes. You have that extended sort of like fade out like the previous track. And it's just those extended choruses do take up more runtime at a steady tempo there. You have enough kind of variety with the key parts there to not become disinterested with the loop. I think that the adjustment to the layering of certain elements, depending on the part of the song you're in, is effective as well. What I noticed is that you don't have those drums again over the parts where they're telling the story, like at the start of the piece there, but the drums are there in those verse and chorus parts, which I dig, just to add a bit of sort of compositional diversity within it. Working through those sort of hi-hat, kick and snare patterns in with the quarters, eighths, and 16th with a similar shuffle as prior there. That might just be a type of kit or movement we're having for a lot of this. The bass line underneath there, an electric bass there, has good presence in the mix. It's not too overwhelming. It moves around a little bit. But a lot of the color, as opposed to the previous song, comes from the keys and the way they kind of descend there, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and they kind of dance around there with an innate sadness that comes from how pristine they are, but also the reverb and tails on them. It's just kind of empty and barren and sort of demented sounding. When you combine everything as opposed to just the theme itself. It's minor oriented, which makes total sense considering the egregious subject matter there. And I have a feeling that might be the entire album's sort of direction there, which is on the nose. But again, as I mentioned, what we're talking about, it's fine. So when I consider the varieties of the different vocal leads and stuff like that alongside what's going on structurally with the piece, it's totally fine. I hear this track and I go, we've gone from Jonestown, drinking the Kool-Aid, to Forest of the Impaled there. So we're just going to go through a wide variety of subject matter. It's more of a kind of a variety box album as opposed to one singular thing chapterized as a progression. Studio production, recording, mixing, mastering wise, similar comments to the previous track. Vocals come through clearly, sort of clear cadence, texture, and timbre to it. No weird resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum there. Again, I appreciate the use, how the narrator, the rapped parts, and the chorus elements all kind of sound like they're within the same song. And I dig the tightness of the gluing of the compression there within this track as well. It sounds solid. And again, having that fold in as well, those samples is cool. So ultimately, yeah, no, 2 for 2. I know I mentioned this in the previous part there. The only thing I would say is just that sudden organ part there that we had, if I'm not mistaken, just was very kind of on the nose and a bit kind of brash. But I'm going to sort of wait until I hear more of those elements to see if that's kind of like an overwhelming kind of tune or pattern through the album, or if it's just these first 2. We have The Ranch, track number 3.
Well, not around me, you didn't have no speed, because I wouldn't allow no speed on that ranch. I kick ass over there. I take a little grass, a little LSD, but none of that was destructive. Anyway, you can ask any of them other girls that'll tell you that the other side of this game. I don't play drugs. I play light, you know, light, dibby dabby, chippy, but I don't really get down heavy with it.
It was the late 60s, people were fueled by the hate of hippies. Lived in the fray with the sickly, women stripping, Linnea Quigley. Last chance to abandon or come with me. It may be an iffy ride, Spawn Ranch to Cielo Drive. The last time this group was seen alive. On the first night they took 5, on the second night another 2. That despite reality unglued, face of freight, violence ensued. A message spread across the wall and blood for all of you. Perfect culmination. When evil thoughts consume, they murdered the wife and slaughtered the groom. Broke pig on the wall in the room. A cult satiated on fear and doom. From the shadows we appear to loom. The fresh scent of Sharon's perfume. Blood and iron, we made our escape as they played the sirens.
Here at the ranch, we do what we can. Lend a hand to help our fellow man. Campfire with Charlie playing a mellow jam. Deep in thought, trying to develop a plan. Here at the ranch.
Splattered on the floor, nylon rope soaked in gore, choked the life out until she didn't move no more. Rotten to the core like tooth decay. Got more in store with Bobby Boussalet. Burn the building down, set the roof ablaze. Living a daze in a hallucinogenic haze. Uncle Charlie in the schizophrenic days. Hundreds of stab wounds in 2 days. And the truth remains to be seen. But there's much more than what we need. Details that would baffle you. Just be happy they didn't capture you. I doubt you last a few moments. These are true omens. You turn hopefuls to hopeless. And if you yokels get vocal, then I might have to just choke a few. But if you only knew, playing my hand is hard, it ain't easy. I got a ranch full of various people that need me.
Here at the ranch, we do what we can. Lend a hand to help our fellow man. Campfire with Charlie playing a mellow jam. Deep in thought, trying to develop a plan. Here at the ranch, we do what we can. Lend a hand to help our fellow man. Campfire with Charlie playing a mellow jam. Deep in thought, trying to develop a plan.
When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. When you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, ain't got enough money. I got a little money, and anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money unless you sue them in court. So everybody stand around, and I said, pay me what you owe me. Listen, my words, I live and die by my words. I've lived and died by my words all my life. For 45 years in prison. I keep my word. My word is my bond. I walk on my word. I live on my word.
Do you want the world to let you alone and turn away?
Listen. I broke no law.
Here at the ranch, we do what we can.
I feel like it would have been kind of cool to have just finished on that broken no law part. Like it would have been just like, damn, that's the end takeaway there.
And to help our fellow man. Campfire with Charlie playing a mellow jam. Deep in thought, trying to develop a plan. Here at the ranch, we do what we can. Lend a hand to help our fellow man. Campfire with Charlie playing a mellow jam. Deep in thought, trying to develop a plan.
So a lot of this seems like it's probably going to be drums, bass. I mean, this is a double bass to be fair with keys. Dun-dun-dun-dun. And of course those strings there as well. Okay, so we didn't have that kind of sudden sort of like instrumental shift there that we had in Forest of the Impaled, which I kind of appreciate. I was just testing if that was a pattern or not. You know what I mean? The Ranch, track number 3, I'd say it's about a serial killer or someone who took people and they've been proven to have committed these crimes, and they've been, as per the interview that they had, they've been in prison for 45 years and they still don't think they did anything wrong. And that's an interesting take on it. There seems to be a potential lack of self-awareness there unless they genuinely have reason to think they're innocent. But regardless, I think that this track is another example, again, of not only death coming in the day, but also just simply, to an arguably far lesser extent, just another decrepit experience of death, of people getting drugged and sort of like killed and stabbed 100 times. And it's just a terrible situation. Like, there's enough subject matter that is discussed both in the spoken, like the samples of the interviews, etc., as well as the verse parts, and also the kind of interesting rhetoric that is discussed in the Ranch part. It's a similar approach to Jonestown, where we discuss kind of like getting comfortable, someone playing a cozy jam, etc., making a plan there. It's interesting that you have the person with like a kind of a whisper kind of country voice there discussing things, and then you have everyone kind of coming along with them on the sides to further express that. It's just interesting. Again, further adjustment to the main lead layers, but also kind of exploring the sides of the stereo field, which I appreciate for that additional bit of oomph in those post-chorus sections. I think structurally, you know, outside of really competent like structuring for the most part of when the different sort of spoken parts and interviews, etc., come in, I still feel like you could have potentially just stopped it on the part where the guy said that he didn't think he'd broken the law. But I also feel like they're wanting to keep up this methodology of having these fade outs be at the end of each track, and so that's totally fine. The rapped vocals have a similar kind of intent and direction that they have in previous tracks, so we've got like reliable inputs at this point that we can go, okay, we know it's going to be done well. It's just, it's all the sound effects of everything is light as well that do a lot of heavy lifting in this to really sort of elevate the experience. So again, vocals within this track are well handled for the most part there. Structurally, aside from my comments on the outro bit, effectively you have clean transfers between elements there. The main elements that you have instrumentally within this are the drums, the bass. With the double bass, it's kind of perky with its approach to some of those note choices. I like how it bounces around a little bit. It kind of has a bit of fun and sadism. But the drums are very much a similar approach to previous tracks, where we're sort of mainly kick, snare, and hi-hat oriented. And I think that, again, will probably be the same, if not similar, for us the album. I think maybe they just assumed that straight 4/4 would be a bit too literal. The keys that you have playing a mixture of triads and bass notes, as well as adjusting those sort of like chords occasionally then to mess with the major and minor leanings there, with the minor being predominantly minor. The strings coming in at occasional points, they're just for a bit of drama as in Spence, and the high end there, a bit of kind of sizzle and fuzz and buzziness there to kind of add just a surprise, I suppose, because I feel like even though I do appreciate the sound of the combination of the keys, drums, and bass, I can imagine that it might have been a little bit too linear if we didn't have those changes in intensity in that range. And the way that they kind of danced around with the legatos, the mixture of staccatos as well, was very intense there. Ultimately, I think they were trying to sort of describe the mania that was going on within this, and I think that it fixed it really neatly. It plays off without going into chromatics there, very safe diatonically, so it's accessible for a wider audience, and thematically it just remains to be minor. Given the subject matter, is totally fine. Not putting too much forward in terms of extensions. If anything has been played with, it's basically, oh no, it could have extensions actually. It might have da-da-da-dum. Yeah, no, there are some extended chords in here, so a bit of nuance there, but only occasionally. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering is tight for the most part. I feel like it was more consistent and steady and sort of like digestible in this one, and I feel like, you know, automation volume at the end with the fade out, nice and loud bit of pumping, you know, side chaining, and just having all the different interview takes leveled in a way where there's still a bit of noise from the interview itself, but on the way where it's noticeable is also very good. They've processed this stuff well. We have Blood Bathory, track number 4.
Violence wasn't hidden in the shadows of Elizabeth's childhood. It was center stage, part of daily life. She likely witnessed peasant executions, public mutilations, brutal floggings, not as horror, but as justice, as tradition, as entertainment.
The countess of blood suspended from above. Slash the esophagus, don't need a sarcophagus. Bathe in the essence of the moonlight luminescence.
Nice line with sarcophagus.
Leaks from her chambers. You get drenched, indulge in the flavor. Vulgar behavior. Gutted the maiden with a saber. Blotted blood as they fillet her. Tortured at the hand of Bathory's anger. Being outlandish as a savage savored. Extreme punishments for bad behavior. Needle under fingernails, pray to your savior. Your feeble not looking well, going with the vapor. The crook of gloves studded with razors. So succumb to meet your maker. The succubus of sacrifices. Crack skulls and vices. Spear on the blood and likes it. Igniting the flame, gateway to immortal. You're standing with the greatly immoral.
When blood spills, I start stealing. Fall for lost sauce, fickle, psychopath on a whole path. It's a psychological reputation, mythological is degradation for the lot of you. Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose. When blood spills, I start stealing. Fall for lost sauce, fickle, psychopath on a whole path. It's a psychological reputation, mythological is degradation for the lot of you. Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose.
Chained to the floor winter, she poured water on you. The flesh splinter, the death bringer, the bell ringer, the hell singer, the swell sinner. A look in the eyes, you see hell's in her. A soul coated in hell's winter, plucking all fingers with hot pincers. The force fed red hot cinders. Dead the best if you were not with her. But hold on, the plot gets thicker. Between the brutality and mass fatalities, she showcased the animality. The walls of the castle, a horrific gallery. Blood splattered torture devices, scattered bodies, rotten lifeless. Plotting to take your life quick. Spotted with the knife in the courtyard, like a game of Clue when she came for you to pull your card. Like Kano when she pulls your heart. Otherwise, horses can pull you apart. To her, it's morbid art.
These descriptions are so visceral. Like, I like the attention to detail that we go into in regards to discussing how Elizabeth, you know, goes on this warpath, but it's feral, dude.
Fall for lost sauce, fickle, psychopath on a whole path. It's a psychological reputation, mythological is degradation for the lot of you. Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose. When blood spills, I start stealing. Fall for lost sauce, fickle, psychopath on a whole path. It's a psychological reputation, mythological is degradation for the lot of you. Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose.
Servants later described seeing girls strung up by their ankles, throats slashed open, blood draining into buckets. Others spoke of branding irons, iron needles, even human bites. One said she saw Elizabeth force a girl to eat pieces of her own flesh. And these weren't rumors. These were sworn statements. Real people under oath. Whether she believed in blood magic or not, Elizabeth was obsessed with control, with pain, with youth. And inside the stone corridors of Chuck Teach Castle, no one was safe from her hunger.
It makes me feel actually unwell. I struggle with that stuff.
Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose. When blood spills, I start stealing. Fall for lost sauce, fickle, psychopath on a whole path. It's a psychological reputation, mythological is degradation for the lot of you. Life's on the line and there's a lot to lose.
Oh. Yeah, that wasn't pleasant to listen to, if I'm honest. I didn't enjoy that. I don't like this, like, how do I say it? It's not because it's done badly, it's that it's so affecting that you just feel kind of gross and uncomfortable. That's effective music, but at the same time, you know. Blood Bathory. It's just a gruesome, brutal representation of who Elizabeth was, whether it was from like the storytelling, narrating the experience of the people, what Elizabeth did, to the verse parts discussing the game of Clue, not needing a sarcophagus, the eternal journey for, you know, like blood magic. It's just so messed up, dude. It's so messed up, dude. What a nutcase, dude. what a crazy person. I mean, I get it, when medicine wasn't as developed, you were looking for answers to things. And I get maybe she just assumed that if she ingested the blood, it would somehow end up in her body outside of the deliberate. But, yeah, no, I think honestly, like, just the non-emotional attentiveness of the narration allows for you to kind of interpret it whichever way you want, and for it not to be too front-loaded, which I like. I think that the consistency of the rapped parts there, telling the story the way they do, with the use of the woman moaning like a succubus for sacrifice or something like that, but also the kind of gritting and grinding and all the noises and slicing and feral sort of like tones and effects and stuff like that, is just, ugh. It's like you're surrounded by it. It's a very surreal experience. I don't think this is going to be an album for everyone, but again, I just need to stress that that's not an indication of it being done poorly. It's just that there are certain things you'll discuss and talk about that will niche it immediately. And that's okay. Music doesn't need to be for everyone. Effectively though, again, you have the sung lady vocals in the chorus, which kind of seem like there's a lot of words going on in that hook section. It almost seems like we're having to kind of rush through those words in a way where I'm wondering if we could have had a bit more sort of like rhythmic coherence or connection to what was going on with the drums in that part. But like, it's okay that we wanted to do that, because simply, even if it was just like at the end we had the busy part, I don't know, or the kind of further sort of rationale or building of it. Ultimately though, I listened to this and think it told the story that it needed to, it went quiet that it needed to, with the really sort of specifically gruesome parts, and the towel you went on with it, especially the sound of the heart monitor going bing at the end for the person dying. Yeah, okay, you can figure out how that works. It's kind of like you died at the end, you got caught by Elizabeth. Ugh. I think that the similarity structurally the previous tracks, we have again the mixture of narration, verses and choruses. It works well. You clean transfers between, it makes the most of the 4 minutes 46. Again, like the grossness of some of those vocal kind of like overdubs and samples and stuff like that further elevates some of those verse sections and does, as I said, more world building. You've got a theremin, I think, of something or other, like creating a really kind of ghostly, spooky sound that is almost like the spirits screaming from the great beyond after they got strung up by their ankles. The electric bass that we have as well dances around in the low end there in a way that thumps along quite neatly to those quarter, 8th, and 16th note grooves that you have on the drum kit, with like an 8th note pattern overall with quarter note accents. And there's a nice kind of push to some of those accented kicks. And you have some kind of whistly elements and occasional points for a bit of extra kind of harmonic kind of resonance in the mid-range, but ultimately a lot of the whistling in the high end just kind of makes it sound almost empty and miserable. I do dig that there was a harpsichord as well for a kind of a Yale Victorian England kind of aesthetic to it. It's nice to have that bit of kind of an adjusted texture that we haven't really had yet. We've had keys, but we haven't had another type of it. I don't think a piano would have necessarily been timely for it, so that's cool. That's cool. It kind of brings you back to the horror. And then we have another fade out at the end and amongst those verses and choruses and interlude narrated sections. So again, structurally makes sense, tight performance, no note out of place. Thematically, minor leaning, because of course it is. Why would this possibly? In the major tone there, it's mostly diatonic as well. No real risks taken with this, but I think primarily because the vocal leads are the main focal point. I'm just thankful we do have those extra bits of vocal overdub to spice things up. Studio recording, mixing and mastering. Effectively, things are well leveled within the stereo field and frequency spectrum there. Music surrounds you in the headphones. Similar comments to previous ones in terms of how the sample vocals going with the vocals, and I just feel like the words came through a bit clearly and kind of mucked up. Like they were a little bit too busy in the choruses. And there's also kind of a fuzziness to the vocal textures of some parts of this album. I'm not sure what that is, but either way, I do appreciate the verses being the way they are presented like that. The rap takes are strong. But yeah, it definitely is discussing death within this one for sure. Because we have Salem, track number 5.
These are witches, my lord, and you want me to have mercy. We need to eradicate all of Salem of this treachery. If you decide to go against me and the village, then we shall take the matter into our own hands.
Salem witch trials?
It started 1692, Massachusetts, accusing masses of being Judas. Betty contorting movements, led to enforcing ruthless mandates, forged to force those in court to find what truth is. And see who is down to die for me. I'm feeling the pressure like Charles Corey. Faces of death, look in the lens and smile for me. Sacrifice given to the dead from the living. Present the head of the villain. Blood bled through the ceiling. Woods of townsfolk, torches in the village. Sheriff stood on victims, a sickening display. Then a heart attack took his breath away. Centuries of a cursed bloodline, death and decay. Daily raising the stakes. He had a smile while she was raising the stakes. Mass hysteria through the state. Yeah.
Okay, that was a really neat sort of transition and sort of like adjustment there. I'm sure that we had the organ for the kind of Dracula implication of Vlad in Forest of the Impaled, so I'm assuming that's why it was there, but just the way that kind of slowed down and kind of got a bit sort of demented and just kind of dissolved there was really neat.
Was 12 and the priestess, from hell the beast unleashed them, in the belly of the creature when they reach him and he eats them. The gamer even for his freedom, from the Colosseum to the mausoleum. Witch hunter in the samba season, brought drinks from the Guyana region.
They blamed it on the supernatural, something many Puritans didn't battle. Had the whole town shook to the ground like a baby rattle. The sprawling halls echoed when the judge slammed the gavel. 100-year sentence, plus a hanging at the gallows. Seeking vengeance, they were buried very shallow. They located the graves and the tombs were hollow. It was late December and soon the doom would follow. Unexplained deaths, plagues that caused excruciating pain at best. Had civilians praying for death, begging to be laid to rest. Pagans and vagrants in the mess, decaying from the head and chest. Died alone in his home as he bled in his bed. Losing sanity shred by shred as we stand where the guillotines behead. Overcome with feelings of dread, the secrets we keep in death.
There was 12 and the priestess, from hell the beast unleashed them, in the belly of the creature when they reach him and he eats them. The gamer even for his freedom, from the Colosseum to the mausoleum. Witch hunter in the samba season, brought drinks from the Guyana region.
That's genuinely quite cool.
There was 12 and the priestess, from hell the beast unleashed them, in the belly
Is there a
of the
ping pong blade of the drums?
when they reach him and he eats him.
Or had they been slowed down to suit? Had they been slowed down to suit the tempo?
From hell the beast unleashed them, in the belly of the creature when they reach him and he eats him. There was 12 and the priestess, from hell the beast unleashed them, in the belly of the creature when they reach him and he eats him. The gamer even for his freedom, from the Colosseum to the mausoleum. Witch hunter in the samba season.
Okay, hang on. So I'm not really sure about this one, Salem. I mean, I know the Salem witch trials. They talk about a plague there. I'm wondering if they were confusing one thing for the source of the plague and blaming other people for it. They discuss things in such brutal, visceral detail through this that I was kind of considering it. And you have like the flies swimming around with like the buzzy thing though, all the death and fear around the place. It's a heavy listen, this album. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, it just is. But you have, again, the chorus and the narrated parts in a way where I think we could have potentially have had a shorter track in part due to the chorus being kind of repeated near the end. I feel like it could have been 3 minutes simply because I'm not sure if there was additional subject matter in that point. It might have been cool to have even sort of ended things on like that turntablism that we had. You could have faded out on that, you know. You could have like had the turntablism maybe even repeat behind that chorus section and have things fade out. Regardless though, some interesting ideas in there as well. We talk about the heart attack and then the track kind of slows down there. And I think that's just an attention to detail that I appreciate at this point. To kind of have things be a bit more sort of like literal and symbolic there and to switch up the entire vibe of the song, should I say, in order to make it more exciting. Vocally, similar comments to previous tracks at this point in time. We've got a similar kind of vocal texture and time to the rapper. They're clearly, again, I'm paying attention to the lyrics and everything like that. It's just more sort of summations of it. It's also more that I think my brain is kind of coping with like how intense some of the imagery is, like with simply by kind of glazing over a little bit unintentionally. Like you got like imagery But again, I stress that the rapped parts are great in terms of how they interpret the situation, even if it's a bit literal occasionally. There really is sort of explaining the journey they go through to try and figure stuff out within the difficult situation that they're in at this time with the plagues and everything like that. And I just think it's, again, as I mentioned, it's the world building, it's the atmosphere that's created through the combination of things that are put forward here. So ultimately, I think, yeah, you have different narrators, similar vocal takes to the way it's processed. I think this was less busy in terms of the chorus as well, so I like that. And yeah, honestly, structurally, I've already put my comments forward on that, maybe having like a shorter end to the track there, but ultimately it's clean transfers between the other elements within the piece there, and it's still short at 3.5 minutes. Instrumentally, you have the twinkles of the keys again, returning to form there after Bathory. You have the drums with a similar kind of pattern. I'm kind of wondering if it's not the same drum kit or a very similar drum kit, because of the way that you kind of have this didum there, which would kind of insinuate that we had a drum sampled or a sample kit, and we were kind of slowing it down a little bit, going didum as opposed to dum. That usually happens when you slow down a sampled part there. I think that's cool if that's the case there. It's just kind of noting it for context. It's not all the kicks here, they're just some of them. We could have potentially been trying to add an additional kick on the beat there, and maybe there was just a bit of swing to the next one, I'm not sure. The bass, nice and authoritative, and the low end representing that low end really neatly. And we kind of have this kind of twinkle cascading piano line there in some parts there that sound very sort of mournful and like a tragedy is about to occur. I like when some of these tracks have more active right hands on the keys there, just to kind of add a bit of further sort of instrumental adjustment, alongside again the slow down of the production from sort of like a post perspective before that first chorus line. The way we kind of seg neatly into that hook was clean. And I do think actually we explore some chromatics with that right hand as well, which is nice. We've probably done so in the past as well, but it's more literal here or obvious here to me, I suppose. Thematically minor leaning, because for obvious reasons, I think, and again, as I mentioned, I think the rest of the album is going to probably be the same. There doesn't seem to be a lot of happy material here, with the next track being Bubonic. Studio post production, again, that slowdown, that adjustment to the feel, intensity, and sort of like movement of the track before that first chorus was neat. That's a clear, deliberate stylistic decision, which I appreciate. And yeah, we move on from that with clear leveling of elements, spacing within the stereo field there. Nice sort of like balancing of different lead parts there. The extended fade out at the end was good too, even if it could have come in a bit sooner. And again, I just dig the way that we approached the turntablism that we had in that post section. That was a nice way to sort of split things up, I think, though, to be fair. And the way that it just kind of oscillated outward to the upper register there had a kind of very sort of a ghostly, ethereal and spooky feel to it. So yeah, we're doing well. We're doing well. We've got Bubonic though, track number 6.
Perhaps most haunting are the accounts from smaller settlements, the villages and market towns that formed the backbone of medieval life. Here, the plague's impact was often total. Entire communities simply vanished, their fields returning to wilderness, their churches standing empty, their names surviving only in tax records and land grants.
It's nice to have the strings only on one side.
The village of Tusmore in Oxfordshire was completely abandoned, its population either dead or fled.
The year was 1346, beginning of the end. Start the eclipse, rat fleas got him sick. The disease, this rap was so quick, bleeding soaked with wounds that are open. Plague doctor serving the potions, diverting commotion, traversing the oceans, hoping to lose the omen, coping through emotions. A man watched his family die hopeless. An infant was infected, she left it to the roaches. The streets reek of vile necrosis. Physicians ain't got an inkling of diagnosis. Sinking in the doldrums with a soul shift. Just know this, even the most evil villain couldn't wipe out hundreds of millions. The bubonic was beyond ominous. Blood on the tunics of the Teutonics. Villages overwhelmed by all the violence.
The epidemic of pestilence, benevolence turned malevolence, and the time's last testament, death and decay across the continent. The epidemic of pestilence, benevolence turned malevolence, and the time's last testament, death and decay across the continent.
Almost like a rage virus. When the blood poured from the eyelids, with swollen nodes poking through holes in clothes, exposing lesions to the code. In a region where diseases explodes, everyone's a walking ghost. you don't see a soul. Lovers broke apart in hopes to flee alone. Feeling defeated, they reached the shores looking for home. But it was more the same. Wherever the flames roam, bloodlines extinguished, diminished in droves. Living in caves and coves, hoping to be left alone. But in the end, the rat just found a new home. We need answers, but even doctors don't know. The apocalypse in tow, the end the prophets foretold. The few left the torn souls, a scornful host. A normal became normal for most. Society became immoral and gross.
The epidemic of pestilence, benevolence burned malevolence. End of times, last testament, death and decay across the continent. The epidemic of pestilence, benevolence burned malevolence. End of times, last testament, death and decay across the continent.
The psychological impact proved almost as devastating as the physical toll. Traditional human bonds dissolved in the face of overwhelming mortality. Parents abandoned plague-stricken children, spouses fled from infected partners, and priests refused to administer last rites. The Italian chronicler Matteo Villani observed that neither relatives nor friends could be found to take care of the sick or bury the dead. This wasn't mere cowardice, it was the complete breakdown of the social contract in the face of existential terror.
The epidemic.
Well, like, why would they? Like, I mean, clearly the parents and children are a horrific thing. Like the parents giving up their kids when they're infected. But like, I don't know why you'd ever consider cowardice to a certain extent, because, you know, it's either one person dying or two people dying, if it's like your mate or something like that, right?
The epidemic of pestilence, benevolence burned malevolence. End of times, last testament, death and decay across the continent.
Like, considering the last decade we'd have, well, it's just side of the field you're on, you know? But that was Bubonic, track number 6, a track about the bubonic plague and how it killed hundreds of millions of people, and not only, you know, infected people, but it also was, as they further iterated within the narrated part in the second half, but also you could kind of get the understanding of from the vocals and the verses. It's the psychological impact of not being sure what it was, not knowing, and being scared and just running. Like, that's terrifying. That's utterly terrifying, you know? We as human beings nowadays, again, whichever side of the field you're on, we have problems understanding things that have a source, let alone understanding things that don't. And in that day and age, in 1300s or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, like, it would have been terrifying, dude. Especially not being able to give last rites in the parts of the world that were heavily religious would have been terrible, you know, not least the children and parents and stuff like that. So it's a different kind of horrifying. In kind of a messed up way. I think it's also kind of important to talk about this stuff because it lets us know that history, kind of repeats itself a little bit, but also, because there's been other plagues throughout history as well, but it's also that it makes you grateful for the fact that you didn't live at any of these periods, whether around Vlad or, you know, Elizabeth Bathory or Salem, you know, the 1700s. Makes you thankful you're not around that. The narration is, as usual, is on point and descriptive in a way where it sets a scene in a very sort of like moody, spooky way. It kind of makes every track kind of seem like a horror film, like you're walking into a nightmare. The verse sort of rap vocals are like the one thing, I suppose, it's not entirely fair to say the one thing, but like one of the main things kind of tying this album together in terms of their approach and respect to things with like the mains and overdubs, and I think that's well handled as well. The flow and cadence and adjustments of the lines there are not just having one line rhyme with the next and kind of like playing with the meters of the rhyme patterns and schemes is cool. The textural shift of the lady vocalist in the chorus part is great as well. There you kind of bouncing between things, and there's no awkward transitions or moments within this piece that are sort of like distracting from the overall experience. At 4 minutes 13, it's nicely fleshed out with a variety of different sort of rated sort of verse and chorus parts as well as instrumental sections. What I dig is to have the strings just on one side there, kind of dancing around the place, whilst you have the bass sort of doing its thing as well. It was just cool to have that kind of symmetry within the stereo field. As you have those continue forward with like the rest of the string section kind of supporting things in that like lower mid, then you kind of get the feeling that the song is more trying to let you know the heaviness or the gravitas of the piece. There's a kind of a surreal sounding key element there or synth part around the 1 minute, which was some kind of threatening to be a little bit kind of like, what is this? I don't know, but it kind of stays there for a moment and then sort of like separates itself, which is cool. You have I think it's the same drum line if I'm not mistaken. If not, you know, another one underneath that bass line as well, which is cool. It's very versatile. You have a kind of bass line dances around similar notes throughout in a way where it kind of remains around the root note and provides a lot of kind of like flexibility for the surrounding upper harmonic elements like the strings and vocals, etc. The theremin as well comes in and certain elements there and oscillates in the high end with a nice wobble, and there is enough instrumentally to fill out that amount of time there. It doesn't feel like there's any filler within this one. And you have another fade out at the end there, which is something we've had in every track so far there. And it's cool, it's fine. It becomes predictable to an extent, but I think if you like your fade outs, this is good. Thematically minor oriented there, a bit of a surreal experience with some of those upper elements there, but I think the strings deliver the kind of emotional pain and turmoil that we're having, as well as a sense of confusion and sort of like a supernatural kind of aesthetic with, again, the theremin, which I kind of dig. It's more about how the story as well as the textures and timbres tell the story, as opposed to it being literally about only the key. Definitely not a happy situation, or even maybe a midsection to be in. It's like thoroughly depressing. Studio recording, mixing and mastering. The different vocal takes, strings, synths, theremin, bass, and drums are well leveled within the stereo field and free spectrum. There's a bit of dynamic range, you know, things compressed well. There's no sort of weird peaks or issues with the leveling and post. Nice and loud, bit of pumping bass compression limiting is handled, and we continue with track number 7, Black Market Bazaar.
He is a sick man. He doesn't even live in reality. He is a paranoid.
Very busy piano, and I like that.
And he honestly needs help. But knowing him, he won't seek it. He feels he is too strong mentally to let anyone even close enough to tell him what he's doing is wrong. He doesn't even see it as wrong. He sees it as business.
Bludgeoning blows for crushing my foes. Hush your woes from your disgusting holes. To the lisp and stick dusty roads I must oppose for a juxtapose. Complete opposites. I thrive from my elite accomplishments. Recruited colleges, you couldn't abolish this. I don't strike back and make it obvious. I've been down the street a week running reconnaissance. Blending with the local populace. Got your schedule calculated, your daily route. GPS calibrated at your usual stop. And now I'm waiting. Chloroformed out of the mouth, you're sedated. Within hours you awaken with a splitting headache. Tied to a bed frame, forget your name, you're no longer human. Gotta keep the organs iced or we can't use them. I don't get pleasure from this or find it amusing. This is business and the bill's been due, kid.
I'm on the battlefield, throwing blow like overkill. It's dead rising when your hopefuls try. Delivering doom like evil dead in the eye. Rather fall out or lose to the end of time. I'm on the battlefield, throwing blow like overkill. It's dead rising when your hopefuls try. Delivering doom like evil dead in the eye. Rather fall out or lose to the end of time.
I'm not a killer, I don't get paid for slaying ya. I get paid for harvest, shipment to Romania. Moving with mania, got my clients waiting, surgery expert. Can't afford dying patients, don't try my patience, cause I'm out of those. Breathing out your nose with a hose with your mouth sewn. Gotta suffer bones that make souls groan. When his teeth are shown, laying flat, keep it prone. You're in the murder house of H.H. Holmes, so vacate hope. I got two sides and you can't placate both. No way to satiate the goat. If you break the oath, we're taking note. You'll be taken to a forsaken hole until it takes a toll. I learned to take the road less traveled, less questions, less hassle. Transported to a ramshackle castle. Dr. Frankenstein, monster in shackles.
I'm on the battlefield, throwing blow like overkill. It's dead rising when your hopefuls try. Delivering doom like evil dead in the eye. Rather fall out or lose to the end of time.
Yeah, we do have adjustments to drum grooves in this. I like some of the use of the open hi-hats here.
When your hopefuls try. Delivering doom like evil dead in the eye. Rather fall out or lose to the end of time.
Yay, more turntablism. Okay, Black Market Bazaar, track number 7. I'm sort of in two minds about this one. I kind of get the impression they start talking about Frankenstein's monster at some point. I was like, at that point, because you also get the feeling this is about someone sourcing parts for, organ transfers and transplants and stuff like that. So I'm kind of taking this as potentially being about organ harvesting and sort of taking people's body parts and sort of like it just being business. And discussing something that's a bit more sort of modern, I suppose, is a very sort of like visceral experience. It reminds you that not all of these horrors occurred, 30 or 300 or 700 years ago. They're happening today, and it's feral, dude. It's not nice. There's more to it than that, but that's my kind of takeaway from it. And I think it's, with these reviews, I hear the lyrics and I look at the summation of what they're trying to communicate, mainly because it is a reviewer. The main thing that I kind of look into is, do I understand what they're trying to communicate regardless of what is necessarily being said as a whole? And it's like, yeah, I get it. We have different voices and approximations of things. I think that if you sit there discussing the intricacies of the individual lines, you could be there for hours. That's part of why I do it. But the use of like Cobra Kai and other sort of like pop culture references is kind of neat there. I think there's other parts as well, like maybe Left 4 Dead or something like that. But either way, I just think it's, again, we tell our stories neatly. That has been something that has been consistent throughout this, especially with tracks like Blood Bathory, which were quite affecting. So the vocals in general were handled quite well. Similar sort of like voicings and stylings here with like a male vocalist that's come in previous other parts of the album there, such as I think on The Ranch. And we transfer neatly between parts structurally at 3 minutes 12. It's well fleshed out with a variety of verses and choruses there. I do like the turntablism that returns as well. And the way we're kind of chopping those vocals up is a nice sort of alternate way of presenting those as well. That's kind of cool. I dig that as like a different way of doing a lead. Is kind of like a turntable solo. I think, to be fair, like structurally, like we just have a fantastic lead line on the keys as well there. It's so active and sort of like sparkly despite being kind of depressing in the way it plays its melodies there. It's almost trying to sound kind of sophisticated, like we've looked into a salon and we've gone into the bad place. Like we've walked into the wrong environment there and we're about to get laid out. The bass and the drum lines underneath provide a steady groove with some interesting open hi-hat patterns. I kind of like that we had some sort of offbeat or sort of off-timer stuff. I dig the way that kind of stood out to me. And I like that we're adjusting the drum patterns in some points within this album to have slightly different experiences. We have some sort of like sub-basses or sort of resonances in the low end as well, occasionally some accents. And the bass line as well does try to be a bit more minimalist, and I think to allow more room for the piano to do its stuff on top. I think, the keys are the star of the show in this, outside of the different vocal layers, and the turntablism at the end is a nice way to switch up the flow or sort of like make up of the piece without overwhelming things. I think the voice at the start, the way they have the delay and repeaters on it as well, just as a closing note before we talk about the theme there, makes it seem very kind of gritty and kind of mysterious, I suppose. It's an otherworldly experience listening to the person discuss their perspective on it. It's not a thing we've had this entire time with it. I think it was a deliberate styling decision by Klive Kraven here, and I like it. I think sort of thematically, again, clearly it's minor oriented there. We're working with a kind of hip-hop, kind of rap, kind of bluesy sort of like position within this there. Again, the major key wouldn't suit this or any of the other tracks we've had so far. And sort of in terms of recording, mixing and mastering, studio production side of things, again, the balancing of the chopping, turntablism there, as well as the reverb and delay tails and the vocals at the start and the way everything else is labeled is neat. And the other, like the bits of sort of like Foley and sort of like, there's like ear candy-ish parts there and world building we do with the additional effects, sounds and samples is neat throughout a lot of these tracks in general. I'm kind of getting a feel for this album and the kind of patterns that we would predict. And I dig that we've been relatively consistent across it. We have Devil in the White City.
Another structure rose quietly in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. Unlike the fair's grand halls and glowing lights, this building held secrets. It was a labyrinth of rooms, hallways, trapdoors, and hidden chambers. Behind its brick walls, dozens of people entered and never came out.
You won't leave alive, so step aside if you're destined to die. The castle large enough to hold 5 families of 5. I'm human slime where I'm standing. It's feast of famine, a creature of the streets I canvas. I manage to blend well, invite guests inside. It don't end well, beyond direct danger. This place is laced with torture and gas chambers. I laugh in my anger because I'm psychotic, unhinged and diabolic, unstable, neurotic. You need a place to stay, you got it. In a few days you'll face decay, if I'm being honest. When the beast of Chicago feast is total carnage. There were 3 of them choked in the harness. You've awoken the heartless, now be poked in the heart with something sharper than sharp is, a carcass pale and blue. I'm a shyster, there's nothing I ain't prepared to do. There's nothing evil enough to compare me to. So I'll mop up the blood and prepare the room.
There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history. There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history.
You can't ignore the monster. Refer to me as the torture doctor, burning victims alive, scorched like lobster. Dance with the wolf, no Kevin Costner. My vengeance harsher, no sense in the aura. You're fencing with the horror. There'll be no mention of tomorrow, and I only mention cause I'm sensing the sorrow. Work solo, so no henchmen to quarrel. The scent violates the senses, so immoral. Known as abnormal, stabbed in the throat with a blade of stony coral. Using phony names to rest on my laurels. I'm not impressed with the rest of you mortals. My castle has trapdoors and hidden portals. I act nice and normal to win the corridors, and I swarm you. Remove from earth, your loved ones will mourn you. Don't give warning to individuals. Sick in the head, this isn't a ritual. The situation you're facing is critical. I'm twisted and visceral with the bloodlust of a vicious criminal. A sickness I'm living through. Let me give you a quick visual.
There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history. There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history.
From a young age, he was fascinated by death, anatomy, and power. Some say he dissected animals. Others claim he showed no empathy at all. As a teenager, he pursued medicine obsessively. He enrolled at the University of Michigan Medical School, where he developed a disturbing hobby, stealing cadavers. He and his classmates would use the bodies to defraud insurance companies, staging elaborate accidents and collecting payouts. This marked the beginning of a pattern: charm, deception, and death, all under the guise of professionalism. Mudgett had discovered his formula.
There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history. There's a devil in a white city, a savage ravaging shows no pity. In the murder castle locked in with me, a brutality unmatched through history.
So that was Devil in the White City, track number 8, where I presume to be about a doctor who, potentially, I hesitate to say psychopath, I forget what the different conditions of those are, but someone who was interested in basically acquiring dead bodies and using them to either make money or just got kind of a craving for that kind of side of things, I suppose. I mean, I know there's more to it. It's just it's difficult to sort of really go into it more without having to actually discuss the intricacies. It's really horrific material in it. I appreciate it as an educational resource. I think that it's important to have music like this, to let people know about the horrors that have occurred in the past. So if nothing else, I've learned quite a few interesting things today, and I'm genuinely appreciative for that. It's just interesting to learn more about the person, the people disappearing, etc. You go through these albums you know, these songs in this album, and you know that it's going to be an unpleasant kind of chilling experience, and it's effective music in that regard. It's not a criticism. It's just me being transparent as a reviewer, but I nonetheless appreciate the way that we're putting things forward there. The spookiness of the da-da-da-da, that melody that you have from that lady after the da-da-da-da-da, the kind of almost melancholic male vocals in those chorus parts. The rapped verse sections, which are that kind of shining light in the darkness there in terms of how sort of like appreciable and how consistent they are. And the narrator as well, telling us more about this person, giving us the insight there. You have so many different angles to explain things, and I like that, sincerely. Even if I don't feel good, I feel like I've become more knowledgeable, and I appreciate that. And generally, the words come through clearly, and if they're not sort of spoken narrative or dialogue or exposition, they are simply providing a different sort of like melody to put within the ether. I dig the fact that we're adjusting the hi-hat pattern, such as in that 18-second part there. You know, it's nice to have that bit of sizzle there. I think that's cool. You have the kind of bounciness of the kicks and snares kind of bringing us through outside of that. And it's just an interesting alternate way to explore a drum kit without having the lower end kind of pulse and resonance to it. It kind of makes it seem like you're in stasis. You have the bass performing that supportive role on the low end there with a kind of ghostly sounding key pattern dancing across arpeggios and triads in the background. I think, you know, there's the world building with like the howling sounds of all that. You know, you've got an 808 actually, I think, as a bass as opposed to an electric bass in that form, which is kind of neat. Very sort of stylistically appropriate, and it makes those reverb tails and some of the vocal takes, such as the chorus parts with that dude, just seem a lot more kind of spooky sounding there with the way they oscillate around on top of those lower end resonances. Yeah, and just the sound of like the razor wire and everything like that around like the 105 mark, for example, is it doesn't make it's uncomfortable, but like that's, again, it's affecting. So structurally intriguing. I feel like we made the use of the 4 minutes 24 across these different patterns with the traditionally or typically eighth note groove with the elements within it that are stylistically genre appropriate. Thematically minor leaning, because of course it is. You're not going to go for a major leaning sort of chord progression or key signature with this, typically oscillating around that root note as well. Maybe kind of like doing some sort of chromaticisms or like modulations with the lady's vocal take and those tail parts there, but otherwise being pretty well behaved. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, well layered. I think, again, the reverb tails and the chorus vocals are great. I think that the way things are leveled without any sort of resonances, unless there's that bass, but then that's well behaved and appropriate for an 808. You know, the way the kind of hi-hats float in that early section with the narrator is cool, just a nice sort of compositional dynamic range. And the way that the ladies' vocals are kind of washed out as well to not be as sort of present. They're kind of like a sub-layer is cool just to add a bit of sort of dimensionality to the mix. And then you've just got another, you know, you've got another fade out at the end there with the keys twinkling as they go. Not just playing arpeggios, as I mentioned, but there are also other melodies that they kind of oscillate between. I just think it's nice. A little bit of variety of keys there to spice things up. We have Zodiac, track number 9.
Early last Saturday evening, Celia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, both in their early 20s, were sitting on this knoll of land overlooking part of Lake Berryessa. They thought they were alone, but there was a third man on this knoll, a man who wore a medieval-style executioner's hood, carried a knife and gun, and intended to use them.
This is Zodiac speaking. You're left on your back with your thorax leaking. If it's score you're seeking, I'll give you vast amounts each evening. Rambo knife with the Roscoe when I creep in. Lovers laying teenagers on the weekend. My rain and tear took weeks to seep in. Answers in the ciphers I've been keeping. I love the secluded locations. Eviscerated blades, lacerations separated in ways. Leaving highly achieved butchers amazed. Wear a mask and never get a look at my face. Listen and do as I say, or there'll be consequences. I don't tolerate the nonsense. You be rendered senseless, jabbed in your abdomen, relentless. This is the wrath, not the vengeance. I'm judge, jury, executioner. This is the sentence. I don't have semblance of sanity. I feel tremendous rage against this place. It doesn't understand me, so I choose to let loose mayhem and calamity. Live in my masochistic fantasies. Extinguish the flame of any name who doesn't stand with me.
Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The faceless sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking, your ribs are back. Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The faceless sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking your ribs and back.
I'm a marksman on my targets. Go for organs, not cartilage. It's obvious I'm heartless. Occupants of the vehicle discarded. Human life disregarded, dearly departed. As I carved in his torso, I found joy in life more so. Perhaps I'm a sore soul, but if they take my life, I'll end up in paradise. Living with my snake eyes like a paradise. I don't make threats, I follow through. Attempt to flee, I will follow and hollow you. Now here's the vile truth, I probably passed you on the street and smile back at you. I'm your friend, I'm your neighbor. The point is, anyone can bring the danger. Anyone can resort to uncooked bottled anger. His blood clotted on the razor. In the woods spotted by the rangers. But kept my profile low to minimize danger. They walked away, then later that day, I approached strangers that looked so anxious. The things I did was so heinous. I don't cut deals or make exchanges.
Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The face the sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking your ribs and back. Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The face the sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking your ribs and back.
Tied him up and he still didn't take the money. The kid said, the money's in my pocket. He said, I don't want the money, all I want to do is kill you. Yeah, when I arrived on the scene at Saturday night around 7:13, well, found this young girl in on the shoreline here, all stabbed in several places. And her boyfriend, male companion, came to from, he had been stabbed. He had taken off for help. And the other patrolman came in, which is Dennis Lamb. He found him some 100 yards from here, passed out. So he brought him back to the scene of the, where the girl was.
Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The face the sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking your ribs and back. Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The face the sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and clacking your ribs and back. Cypher of the Zodiac.
Okay, alright.
Cypher of the Zodiac. 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 Cypher of the Zodiac, you're in the grasp of a Kodiak. The face the sadist, the megalomaniac. Dressed in all black, Napa Valley under attack. Let the calico crack, clicking and
Yeah, you could have potentially faded out with the turntablism. Like, I appreciate that we want a longer track and we've had a lot of sort of like development throughout it, but it just gets to the point where if we're repeating the lines there when we've already heard them, what I'm trying to sort of communicate is, because this is track number 9, Zodiac. I'll do the structure first. It's more that in some of these tracks, I feel like we've had a sufficient amount of explanation of the environment and what's happening there. We've had different perspectives, and that's awesome. But it's more that we can potentially overplay something or have it overstay its welcome by having too many times of a similar thing. After you had that guy talking about bringing the boyfriend back to the scene, I think it would have been a little bit better to have just had the turntablism, to have just come to that point there. Just to have had that, and then maybe you had like a couple of times of that and then fade out. I don't dislike listening to the music. The theme is pleasant to listen to. I wasn't as bothered. I don't think I was affected by this as much, simply because I didn't actually know more about the Zodiac Killer. I've watched the documentaries on it and stuff like that. So I suppose it's less new for me. So I think now I was listening to this information going, okay, I understand the games and the puzzles they used to make, how they didn't want the money, they just wanted to kill the person and stuff like that. How they had like a sort of a want for control. And I do appreciate that they had further sort of like exposition on like the position of the girlfriend and the boyfriend there. I liked how the main sort of Raptor verses that we had there were more sort of an elaboration on on the position of being the Zodiac killer as opposed to discussing them literally as well. You had like a rapped chorus as well, which was interesting, with Med mostly sung parts, and it was quite busy vocally in that chorus as well, but not to an extent where it was too much, I think. It had a difference in vocal texture and timbre there, and sort of like separate itself neatly alongside what was going on with the interviews from the officers and stuff like that. But yeah, I do like structurally that we did have the turntablism, even if I feel like we could have potentially had the track a little bit shorter than the 5 minutes or 9. Otherwise, you know, the start of the track, especially with the combination of the drums, the bass, the keys, etc., and the spookiness of that sung lady vocal there, with that melody, boom, boom, like the way that kind of permeates through the ether is chilling. Like it matches the mood neatly. It's like we're mourning these people who have been lost to the Zodiac killer. It's similar kind of like sort of like drum kit sampled groove there with a mixture of quarters and eighths and sixteenths there. Very, very occasional fills throughout this album. Very, very occasional. The bass line underneath kind of thumping along with it in quite a pleasant way. And then you have the keys on top kind of descending with some of those tail lines and stuff like that, resonating with some extensions or like most likely triads for the most part, maybe some inverteds. And you got the sound of like the flesh splitting and all those kind of other parts there in terms of like noises and extra bits of add-ons and stuff like that to further cement the mood of the piece there and make you feel kind of like it's very intense. But I just feel like, yeah, no, aside from my comments on like the end of the track, I feel like the first 4 minutes or so are really tight. It was nice to hear all those different perspectives, and I think the instrumental parts overall niche well with each other. And again, to have the turntables come in as a different lead line was cool, chopping the vocals like that. Thematically, minor leaning again, as I mentioned, it's basically a given at this point that we're probably going to have that with the subject matter there, although we did have some chromatics with the way the keys came down on the right hand. In the studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, it's actually the attention to detail that I want to mention at this point. I'll mention it at the end as well, with the way that the sounds like the flesh splitting and the wire and like the moaning and all those other parts, how they're implemented and layered in a way where like it's easy to hear and kind of unfiltered in comparison to some of the other reverb delay tails that we have on other elements there. It's visceral, but it just, you know, just attention to detail on behalf of, you know, Klive Kraven. But yeah, we got track number 10 there, Rasputin's Last Supper.
Everything to dispose of him. I don't understand why this best of a man was so difficult to deal with. We laced poison into his wine and cake. It had no effect. We shot him still he rattled and twitched. We beat him brutally for several minutes. He still drew breath. Finally, we bound him and tossed his body into the river from the Petrovsky Bridge. Later, we were to recover the body. But oddly enough, we found nothing.
Tried to poison me, then shot me down. The disloyalty beat to the ground. Unmercifully, I was found bound, drowned unfortunately.
Here's some history for the hysteria. I was born to peasants in frigid Siberia. My mother was a government courier. My father was a farmer in the area. I traveled from Bavaria to Bulgaria. We were poor and I carried a lot on my plate. My childhood was harsh and her life wasn't great. I was the only surviving sibling of 8. A young man when I decided to change faith. Needed answers I couldn't find in this place, until I found a sweet soul with a gorgeous face, who I hoped would help me escape my morbid fate. Guess I'm just set in my ways, there's no debate. I refuse to be crushed under this enormous weight. They laugh like I'm a clown with no performance pain. We traveled in a carriage till the horses neighed. I sat with the Lord until a choice was made.
Tried to poison me, then shot me down. The disloyalty beat to the ground. Unmercifully, I was found bound, drowned unfortunately. They foolishly tried to poison me, then shot me down.
A second chorus.
The disloyalty beat to the ground. Unmercifully, I was found bound, drowned unfortunately.
don't believe my words. Things changed when I arrived in St. Petersburg. I bleed from my eyes and it hurts. I was a healer of the family and fell in love with a nurse. Rose to prominence with dominance when nothing else in life would work. As a family, I help with a child who's hurt. They requested my assistance in written word. Some time went by and things became absurd. Mystified every time the flame was observed. We're on a road with no way to change the reverse. In the mail, I got an invite from the prince's wife. Fast forward to a dinner night. I arrive and for sore eyes, she's a sight. There were 5 others in the room, something didn't seem right. We feasted on cake and tea through the night until they shot me and we scuffled in a fight. They bludgeoned me and rolled me in the rug tight, tossed me off a bridge in the dark night.
Tried to poison me, then shot me down.
Interesting, tricky situation.
Let his loyalty be to the ground. Unmercifully, I was found bound.
Kind of sounds like an automaton a little bit.
They foolishly,
big if true,
tried to poison me, then shot me down. Let his loyalty be to the ground. Unmercifully, I was found bound, drowned unfortunately.
How we're gonna end the album is my question to the audience. Fade up. You know what? I'm happy with that one. I'm happy with Rasputin's Last Supper, because that was track number 10 off of the album Death Comes in the Day by Klive Kraven. What do we think this one's about? I think it is about Rasputin and what happened to him. I'm not as familiar with the lore of Rasputin, even though I've literally heard from it there. Just the fact that he was so hard to kill was kind of impressive, like almost like he was a supernatural being, right? The perspective of the people trying to kill him, and then the perspective of, not finding him in the river, like the really heavily distorted, kind of gritty sounding opening section there from the person being incredulous about what occurred. And then the perspective of Rasputin themselves in the verse sections, talking about how they came up and where they were put in their own position on it was kind of neat. But we have this kind of innate sadness from the chorus parts, like the guy softly talking about the disorder, etc. It's solemn and pensive, and I think it's a nice contrast to what's going on within those verse parts there. So I feel like the expression there is appropriate there. I kind of dig the direction we're going in there, and the neutrality of the verse and the rap parts is just, again with the burr, the kind of like wordplay and stuff is neat. And I think what we need to discuss next is effectively the structure of it, which is very similar to previous tracks. We have sort of some sample parts there, some choruses, some verses, etc. And it makes the most at the 4 minutes 30 in a way where I don't feel there's any filler there. But this is a slower track, so it's naturally going to take more time per section. So my comments about the previous track aren't really as relevant here. You can kind of take your time in a 4.5 minute at this tempo and have that fade out at the end and not feel like you've overstayed your welcome. There was also a nice sort of adjustment with that kind of synthy kind of saxophone tone that was on the right side there. I dig that was present. It was almost kind of like trying to take the place of the right hand on the keys there. It's like we made a very deliberate decision to have like the string elements in the previous track or this one positioned the way they are as like a faux lead. They don't really mess with the vocals that way. Like if you had both leads in the center, they're going to maybe clash, but not if we do it the way that Clive's done it here. So that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, the kind of wavered and vibrato there and kind of danced around in the mid to uppers was neat. It was mourning something. It was minor oriented there, which makes sense because the theme is minor there. It's not trying to sort of go out of key at this point. And there was this like choir part or something like that at some point there around like the first part, which was meant to be kind of a sting there. And it kind of was a little bit like dissonant, but not in the way where the notes were wrong. It was just more of a sense of tension there. I think it was more sort of symbolic of what was occurring in the lyrics than anything else. Ultimately, the bass and drums that come in, they dance around the lower end, provide a nice sort of bit of pulse there with the side chaining in terms of the production, and ultimately present themselves well as they appear as per the rest of the tracks within this album. And the keys make a final appearance within this track to sort of decorate the right hand and a little bit of the lowers there, not being too forward because the vocals are clearly the focal points, whichever representation they're appearing in. But either way, you know, you float through this one, you hear more about Rasputin as things come to the close, and you understand the journey we've had with Klive Kraven as well as the potential journey we would have had with the previous two albums as well. So I think like ultimately you have a track which is structured quite well with sort of like neat transfers, a relatively minimalist outro there that doesn't overstay its welcome, a minor leaning sort of like theme that represents a similar sort of like motive and direction artistically to the rest of the album. And then you just have the studio production where I have to give a shout out to the way that even with these kind of really scuffed sounding recordings, we've still kind of managed to make them discernible there. There would have been some, when you take sounds from things, you've got to do a lot of work sometimes to get them to sort of sit in the mix neatly, like old interviews and stuff with the recording quality of them. So I appreciate how I've managed to sort of import these things and make them seem sort of naturalized with the surrounding elements. But ultimately, again, yeah, the leveling and general panning of things is great. It's nice to have a symmetry with the saxophone or synth part when it comes in. And it's nice, tight, bass compression limiting is handled. And we're going to talk about this album more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from Klive Kraven, titled Death Comes in the Day. In this section I'm going to provide an overall album analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique. I should note here that this is not going to be doing much sort of like per track specificity, as I've already done separate post-song conclusions for each of the tracks themselves. So this is going to be overall comments, so feel free to check those out if you're keen. But before we go any further, what do we think this album is about? Effectively, I think that this album is more Klive Kraven discussing a variety of different terrible situations that oscillate around the theme of death, plagues, mutilation, sort of psychopaths, like just terrible occurrences and the people that are involved with them. From the ranch, you know, like Elizabeth Bathory, Rasputin, other people, you know, like the Zodiac killer, like individuals that may have been responsible for things or have had terrible stuff after. There'll be still like supernatural figures. But then we have Bubonic and Salem, like, and a lot of the plagues and everything like that. Also, to be fair, Vlad the Impaler in the second track was especially gruesome. If you're in the mood to listen to this kind of stuff, you're gonna have a great time with this album, because the storytelling across the narration there, the rapped vocal takes with a wide variety of wordplay and interesting sort of rhythmic cadences there, quite reliable on the mic there, as well as a variety of different sort of like male and female sort of like sung melodies and harmonies and overdubs and all that kind of stuff. If you're in the mood to listen to that kind of subject matter, you're gonna have a great time and you're gonna learn a lot. And I appreciate the way that those interviews and those sort of narrations and stuff like that were put in amongst what's going on with the verses and the choruses and the various sort of ways they're presented, as well as the way they were chopped and sort of intermingled. It's just that if you're not in the mood for it, it's going to be some pretty intense subject matter, and a lot of it comes down to how they put the sound effects of like the stabbing and the squelching and the wire and the hanging and the crying and everything like that. They put that in this album for effect, and it will be affecting if you're not prepared for it. I think as a reviewer, that's quite successful music. Like, the last thing you want is to have a track that you listen to and you don't really care about. It hasn't really done anything to you. So I appreciate that this is effectively like listening to a horror film. And it's not comfortable subject matter, and we have to kind of maybe even explore some realities about humans in general from listening through this, especially with tracks like Bubonic and stuff like that in Salem. Hell, even Jonestown and Forest and Impaled. It's just interesting. It's interesting music, but I personally thought it was quite clever for the most part. I appreciated the variety of really sort of like well articulated vocal takes, whether it be the kind of hip hop rap kind of stylings of the main sort of subs there, kind of corresponding to each other occasionally, bit of air candy, etc. throughout most of the rap sections. We occasionally have rapping through the choruses, but mostly they were sort of sung parts of melodies and harmonies, mixture of male or female, or mixtures occasionally. There's some very kind of like wispy, ghostly, ethereal melodies that were sung in almost kind of operatic cadence throughout parts of the song, especially in Jonestown and other parts as well. So ultimately, I feel like we voice ourselves well. We also allow space for the themes. Structurally, these tracks are made up of intros, usually sort of like a narration or an interview or something to give you for more sort of information about things before you go into the verse. We have occasional kind of awkward stops in like the first minute of the track there with some songs where like there's a sudden texture or tone shift or something introduced that kind of switches things up, and it usually works for the most part. I think there was a track at the start, either one or two, where I was kind of like sidelined by it a little bit, but ultimately for the most part I can understand what we're doing and can kind of get behind that. But ultimately, you have some reliable elements in it, such as the drums, which play a variety of quarters, eighths, and sixteenths, hi-hats, snares, and drums. Sometimes we have no drums. Sometimes we just have the hi-hats, but ultimately, it's usually don't, dun, with occasional hi-hats, open hi-hats, should I say there. And we do mix up the way that the kick patterns and snare patterns are presented there. It's not the same beat the entire time. It's just a reliable one that you can expect will be in there. The bass line, mixture of different double bass, sort of electric bass and 808 parts, so I like the variety texturally and timbrally there, and a variety of different note choices and scale modes. We do typically move around in the minor, which is totally fine there. We don't need to overcomplicate things there, but I'm just noting for sort of like transparency that I did appreciate that the bass tones shifted. We had a mixture of predominantly key elements there on the piano there, decorating triads or slight extensions occasionally, some sort of descending melodies or arpeggios there. We had some really fast zany parts very occasionally, but ultimately I think the keys were more sort of a mid to upper level kind of register there with a kind of a spookiness through there. Reverbs and delays very occasionally. I think that was often mirrored in some of the other elements to help them sort of amalgamate. We had a harpsichord and the blood Bathory one to bring us back to the kind of Victorian England period. And we even had some sort of synthesizers very occasionally and some organs as well for a sort of more surreal or kind of like old texture within the piece. We had string sections there that danced around their mid-range and were typically asymmetrical on the side there. Or they filled out the whole section in the verse parts for a bit of extra support in the mid to lows. And I dig that we had alt leads like that. I think also we had some turntablism, which was kind of fun as well in a way where like it suited the genre, the kind of hip hop and rap stylings like the 90s really neatly, whilst also presenting some of those vocal leads in a different way. I wasn't always necessarily totally convinced with the structuring decisions. Sometimes we'd have like an additional chorus at the end there, and we could have simply have had things stop. And I think that that's fine in the sense that we really wanted to either have an extension or maybe like a little turntable solo or something like that, and we wanted to have the fade out in every single song, and it's totally fine. It's just a thing for me is sometimes we could have just had the track shorter, and I don't think it would have necessarily been a detriment to the experience, as I feel like it's more that we got the information we needed, so I don't think if we necessarily needed to have more of it, but nonetheless it's totally fine. Ultimately, you know, it's the way we kind of started things and we continued that way throughout. And there are probably other instruments that I haven't mentioned that I don't remember. But ultimately, I feel like those parts that I do remember, in addition to the varying vocal takes, the ways that we sort of present these tracks as isolated concept, but that they niche together as a wider element there makes this album successful. You go into it immediately understanding the angle and being, getting to the end, recognizing that has been accomplished. You had that, the moment you have two widely varying stories, you're probably going to have 10 like that. If they'd suddenly stuck to a theme afterwards, it might have been a bit random. So I'm glad that we stuck to the bit. Thematically, mine are oriented with all of it in varying ways, forms and factors and tempos, and sort of like, typically it's sort of like a normal time eighth note groove with chord note accents. Mono oriented for the most part, occasionally chromatics for a bit of sort of like sadism or masochism or surrealness to it, but ultimately, triads, and typically sticking to the root notes as well. But things harmonize neatly with each other, and it was never too colorful, just colorful enough to be intriguing, and I appreciate that. And we didn't overcomplicate things. Even though it was quite busy a lot of the time with the overdubs and extra bits of sort of Foley and sound effects and sort of like noises, etc. Stereo recording, mixing and mastering, I do dig. We typically level things quite neatly with the narration, the voiceovers, the choirs, the male sort of like rapped vocals and the hook parts there. Nothing ever felt like too underwhelming or sort of strange or anything like that. There was a relative consistency to it. There was a compositional range where we sort of took things away or brought them back in. Typically it was like taking away the kicks or something underneath those sort of narrated parts, but there were no weird resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum. Music surrounded you in your headphones with occasional symmetry with the vocal parts, and the way the kind of harmonized vocal was spread out in the stereo field was also quite nice. Nice and loud, bit of pumping, sidechaining, bus compression, limiting is handled, and I don't think the vocals were overproduced. There were some moments where I wasn't necessarily sure of the way we were treating things, but I just am glad that we managed to naturalize those interview samples into the mix in a way where it made it sound like it was part of the ether in a positive way. But yeah, I've spoken about the little kind of subjective elements I personally might like change, but ultimately I don't think there's anything that I feel was done incorrectly here, aside from like, because I just would need to listen through it again to sort of really kind of double check those comments I made. And the kind of disruption that happened occasionally could have been a deliberate thing, like when we suddenly slowed down the track in one of the tracks. I think it was Salem necessarily, you know, like a tension thing, because the majority of the sound's great, and so we're very sort of deliberate about it. From a final general listener's perspective, I just think for me, again, I just want to state that even though I occasionally felt uncomfortable with some of the stuff I've heard about, it's a me thing as opposed to the music. I still think it's written and composed quite well. I even though I feel like some of the tracks could be shorter, I do understand that we wanted to make these tracks a bit longer, and we were comfortable with the themes associated. And it's not like it got to a point where it was kind of like actively detrimental. It's just kind of like pedantic, sort of like optimization, I suppose, on my part. But for the most part, I don't think we took the listener's attention for granted. I'm thankful that I got the chance to learn more about these figures from history. I feel like I've gotten a bit of an education today. So thank you for watching my review of this album from an act named Klive Kraven titled Death Comes in the Day. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show us some love via the various social medias and YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as need to help more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.